Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. Himself, George, joined once more by Tom Woods and Tom Pickup for another episode in the Steven Spielberg Retrospective. And this week, we've reached the 21st century, and we will be talking about AI, artificial intelligence. Of course, a film he directed. Not co-directed with Stanley Kubrick, but there's a lot we're going to mention about Kubrick tonight. So if anyone's familiar with this, I'm sure you'll know the backstory. If not, we're going to go over what we know and what we've been able to piece together. But before we even get into the film, our thoughts, any of that stuff, I want to say, how are we doing tonight, Tom? We have two Toms again, the second time on the series so far. If I go to Mr. Woods at the top right first, and then Tom Pickup below after, how are we doing tonight?
Yeah, very good. Well, actually, on the day of recording, it's been rail strikes in the UK. So I made the mistake of leaving my work stuff at the office. So only realised this morning, so I had to Uber it into work instead of working from home, which was good fun.
Sorry to hear that. I'm all right. I didn't have any problems. Easy traffic in the car. Sorry.
Oh. Sorry, I'm envious. I've had 2 hours sleep. For anyone curious about how the candle's being burnt at this rate, so that's like the dour end. That's probably the most dour one we've done so far in terms of interest. But I'll take it. And you know what? By the time this video comes out, I bet there's been more rail strikes. So I'm just going to leave that there. I won't get into the politics of it, but it's very crazy at the moment. It's only because they've just done another one. I don't know if I can go to a football game now, so I'm gonna just mop that up on my Twitter and just moan on there. But aside from that, we aren't here talking about the Arsenal. We are here talking about AI, artificial intelligence. So, everyone, please do comment with your thoughts on AI, artificial intelligence. The film's been out for over 20 years, so you don't need to worry about spoilers. But this is going to be a really interesting discussion, even from what we spoke about before we've hit record. I've seen this for the very first time, literally within an hour of us pressing record on this. And from what I can tell, both of you have very different histories of it, which is really cool. So I think it's going to be a really fun discussion, but we want, obviously, everybody involved at home. And if you're a fan of Steven Spielberg, maybe you're a fan of science fiction, do hit the subscribe button, because there's a lot more Spielberg and sci-fi on the way. Literally next week's Minority Report, if you want a push at what is coming next. So please do all of that. And if you do want to follow us, if you want to find out what videos we do, what we announce, because sometimes we can be very fortunate. We can get advanced screenings for films. We've had a lot of luck with it recently. We tend to announce that sort of stuff on our social medias when in stuff. So you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. And we have a link to Redbubble in the description below, where you can pick up some of our merch. At the time this video going up, it'll be the 9th of August. I think there would have been reviews out for the new Predator film, which has apparently got incredible reviews from those I know that have seen it. There'll also be reviews out for the Arsenal documentary, which I'm dreading, and a lot of other things. It's been I kept moaning there's nothing coming out in August. There's a lot of TV at the moment, so we do have you covered in that respect. But moving aside from TV and going back towards the film stuff, I'm going to put you both not on the spot, because obviously, I've had you both on this series before. We're going to ask everyone's memories of this film. So, as I mentioned, I've seen this for the very first time today. I knew nothing going in, except that obviously it was about AI and it had Jude Law in it. I had no other context than those two things there. But Mr. Woods, what is your history of this film?
That's a very good question. So in all honesty, this is probably my second or third time watching it, and it feels like the first, because I can't remember anything that happened in it. Like there are bits and moments that I think, oh yeah, I recognize that, but overall, I think I watched this when I was younger and didn't think much of it, and then have subsequently rewatched it. We'll come on to my opinions in a moment. But yeah, I mean, my memory is very faint on it, so apologies if that's not really what you're after.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I can't honestly remember an awful lot of buzz about it at the time when it came out. I do remember the odd advert, and it just wasn't something that particularly appealed to me to go and watch at the cinema, which is odd because when you're that age, you can only really watch 12As or whatever. And it was a Spielberg film. It was sci-fi. So I'm not sure why me and my family and my friends didn't watch it. But it didn't seem to make much of an impact at the time. I don't know whether that was partly the marketing. I don't know whether you'll go on to all that, but it only really sort of came to me. I must have seen it for the first time 10 years ago, maybe. And it did completely, partly blow my mind. I couldn't decide what I thought about it. But then the more I've thought about it, the more I've sort of gone back to it. And I don't want to say any more about my views on the film now, but I think I must have watched it, maybe only 3 or 4 times, but all in the last 10 years. And each time I've had a new experience with it.
No, that's fair. And I think you mentioned the marketing. Actually, doing a bit of reading, obviously, there's some 2 famous towers in there, which we'll probably have a little discussion on in a bit as well, because obviously with it being 2001, this film came out. That's very contextual, and certainly the UK date, we'll actually speak about that a little bit later on. But as we always do this series, we're going to read the IMDb plot synopsis. So sometimes we get a paragraph. Today, we've been blessed with a very short line and a half. So without, I don't read these in advance. I copy and paste them in. It's a bit of edge to the series because, people might be watching this that haven't seen the film. We have had that before. The legend that is Martin has commented a fair few ideas about seeing them, which I respect because they're always spoiler discussions. But aside from that, the IMDb plot synopsis is as follows. A highly advanced robotic boy longs to become real so that he can regain the love of his human mother. What I'll say to that is it's got the film bang on. But also, I didn't know anything about the film, so I'm glad that I didn't read this heading into it, because I would say, like, my initial thoughts, kind of veering into my memories. My memory is today. As I said, I knew nothing going into it. I didn't know any of the cast by Jude Law. I knew it was Spielberg. I knew this was Kubrick stuff. I knew it was about AI. I thought this would be the very stereotypical, someone's created artificial intelligence. How is the world going to cope with this design, which is something that's been tried and tested across not just AI but so many sort of sci-fi aesthetic type films? And I'm kind of glad this wasn't that, as my initial thoughts. But obviously the film that we got is then sort of vividly different to what I could have ever imagined, especially some of the Jude Law stuff, which we'll also speak about. But if we wanted to get into behind the scenes on this, I'd start with Kubrick. I'm just going to very quickly bring what this is based off. So the author, Brian Aldiss, wrote a short story called Super Toys Last All Summer Long, way back in the 70s, and then turned it into a film treatment, which none other than Mr. Stanley Kubrick picked up himself. And this is the real big thing for this film. So I knew of this film's rep because of this was like the weird, it's Spielberg, it's kind of Kubrick, but it was after Kubrick died. And I've never really delved into it because I always wanted to see the film and then read the events after. And obviously, for anyone at home that might be more familiar with this than me, if I get anything wrong, please comment. If there's things we might potentially miss out, also please comment, because it's really interesting. There's a story how this film came together. And certainly when you look at the film as a whole, there are moments where people try and pick, is that a Spielberg thing, is that a Kubrick thing? And I think some of the outcomes of that are really interesting. But just off the bars, actually, I might put you on sort of a question. What are both your thoughts on Kubrick? Just as a director, a few of his films. I know it's very on the spot. I've not seen all of his films myself, and I say that ridiculously with the box set behind me. But I'm be quite curious. It's quite interesting for this film, I feel.
Oh, do you want to go first, Tom? Because I need to formulate an opinion on that.
I do think he is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. I think I, again, didn't really know anything about his films until I was probably in my 20s, other than The Shining, which for me must be one of the greatest horror films ever made. And I know it's probably more well-known and more mainstream than the rest of his films, so it sort of gets a bit overlooked. Sorry, it doesn't get overlooked, but it's sort of not seen as a proper Kubrick film, maybe, compared to some of the other ones. But when I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey, again, about 10 years ago, just completely thought that is instantly one of the greatest films I've ever seen. I quite like slow build films, and where it's mood and music. So you're probably already guessing where I am on AI, but it's that sort of, you can instantly tell it's him directing it. Every time you watch it, you pick up something new. And this is the case with all these films. And I think A Clockwork Orange is another one of the greatest films I've ever seen. And every time I see that, I get something new from it. And they're quite disturbing. They're quite bleak. They're not sort of dialogue heavy. They're all about mood and shots and atmosphere. And yeah, I think I've not seen all of them. I've only seen some of them once. So I saw Barry Lyndon for the first time a few months ago, and it's the classic. Probably people won't keep up with the story that well, but the visuals are unbelievable. And Ken Adam got an Oscar for his production design. And yeah, we on our channel we actually spoke to Stanley's daughter, Katerina. She was a production designer on The Spy Loved Me and Moonraker. She actually designed Jaws' teeth, so that was her career. And we talked to her about a lot of his films, and we talked to her about AI. So when we get onto it later, she did give a bit of an insight that he had so many projects on the go all at once, spinning loads of plates, because he didn't obviously direct that many films in his career. Was it about 10, if that? So people think, oh, he was very slow, or he was lazy or something, but not at all, because he get obsessed in a project and then he might have to move on. And obviously this is one of those, wasn't it? That I don't think he thought they had the technology to do justice to the story. So he did eventually pass it over to Steven, and then, yeah, certainly his daughter was very, very happy with the outcome. I know that, and she did think Stanley would have loved it.
No, that's really fascinating to hear. I mean, you know, I'm just coming off this off sort of my personal views. So, and it might not be quite as eloquent as how you described it, Tom. But yeah, I mean, personally, I think Kubrick is one of the best visual filmmakers that has ever lived. But there's something to be said about some of the storytelling in his work. I think that's just me personally, that they seem to be grand ideas on a grand scale, and for the average Joe, it's kind of don't really follow it. And you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that that's an issue, but I think my view on Kubrick is his the visual language he uses is phenomenal, and really dives into the themes that he's trying to explore in his work. Obviously, like you, Tom, I haven't seen all of his films, but that's sort of my gauge of his filmmaking. But whereas plot and story don't necessarily take the front seat, you can gauge a lot from how he shoots a picture and what he's trying to say in his visuals.
That's really well said from both of you. I've not got the eloquence to really put anything past both of them. Yeah, as I said, I've not seen all of his films. I've enjoyed them, and I think you kind of, I want to say you got the nail on the head, Tom. There's two Toms here. I think Mr. was what you're kind of saying. It's when I think of his work, I think of the visuals of it, and I think of he's almost got like a mythology behind the scenes, hasn't he? That you see these behind the scenes videos of, and it's a really, oh god, who am I going to not compare him to? I don't want to compare him to, but you hear stories of how have I forgotten, like David Fincher. It's sort of what he'll put the cast through, the production team through, and you know, it might sound like torture to some, not to others, but when you get to see it on screen, you see it's come out specifically this way because that is his intentions and that's how he operates as a filmmaker. And I think he's such a fascinating individual, especially at a time when he's sort of in that branch of, he did studio films and he moved on to his own films as an auteur, whereas with the Spielberg series, you know, you think of the Brat Packs, you got Spielberg, you got Lucas, you got Scorsese, you got Coppola. They all broke the studio system and re-engineered the industry into their own. And it's very interesting that Kubrick's sort of been on both sides of that, which I think is a really great discussion actually to get this going. And if we want to sort of continue the Kubrick stuff, so you know, he originally offered this to Spielberg in 1985, which is incredible. Now, for instance, been following this series, Spielberg in 1985, he just done Temple of Doom, and he was in the process of making The Color Purple, which really surprised me because he hadn't done dramas per se, yet he'd been offered this film. Of course, you know, it would have been the more AI stuff, the mechanical side of it. I'd imagine he would have spoke to Kubrick about. But it's really interesting to be offered this in the mid 80s rather than the 90s. Obviously, he's going to get it in the 90s, but to me, the 90s is where Spielberg just sort of hits his stride of, here's, to me, the greatest filmmakers ever existed that can do the dramas, can do the blockbusters, can do both at the same time, which I still find astronomical. and it's fascinating to see this process and the creators behind them. Now, there's an incredible book I wish I owned. For anyone that is familiar with Taschen, they do these incredible archives. I've got a Star Wars prequels one behind me. They've done James Bond, they've done Kubrick, Walt Disney, so many things. They're really fascinating books if anyone's ever had the chance to pick one up. They are very expensive, but if you can ever get one reduced from like 150 quid down to 80, it's an absolute bargain. And I know there's a Kubrick one, which would be interesting to see, again, his process. And with this film, I guess it's worth mentioning that when this was eventually passed on to Spielberg, it was in 1995. So this is before... this is during Spielberg's time off, I'm going to say. So he took time out after Schindler's List. This would have been before The Lost World was in production, before Amistad, before Saving Private Ryan, which is interesting because obviously, it sounds very weird to talk about death on a channel like this, but no one really would have known that Kubrick would have passed away a handful of years later. And I know that it was that pushed Spielberg to do this project over some of the others. Now, that jumping too far ahead, because it sounds like I'm just reading a list out. I do have the list of films, but I'll get to them a little bit later on. But obviously, Kubrick's final film was Eyes Wide Shut, starring Tom Cruise and I always forget his name. Nicole Kidman, which I'm still yet to see as well. But how do we feel about him passing it to Spielberg? Because Kubrick to Spielberg, that's quite a leap. I think that's two very different directors. But I find it interesting that they almost worked with each other across the decades, whether it was vague, whether it was detailed. There is a a chemistry there that exists, that it wasn't just Spielberg coming in, taking the story and switching things. It genuinely feels like a co-production, albeit obviously one of them, passed away before that ever happened.
Yeah, in all honesty, I would say that there's not really anyone else you could probably hand this to, because Spielberg doing all of the sci-fi in late 70s, 80s, and it just felt like his staple, and probably one of the reasons, obviously I'm just speculating here, but probably one of the reasons why Kubrick offered it to him in the first place. So I think it's just feels like a natural choice, given that the two, one of Kubrick's, well, arguably Kubrick's most famous film, 2001, being a sci-fi epic, and this one being very similar to that. Obviously not in sort of the grand scale of things, but in ideas presented rather. I think it just feels like a natural choice and a logical leap to take.
It's a perfect storm for me, I think. You're quite right. If you just sort of read the headlines, you'd think, oh, Stanley died, so Steven just took over. But obviously, like you say, it was intended to collaborate long ago. And I think that the finished product, you can see so much of both of them in it. And that's it's unusual because, of course, Steven wrote the screenplay, which is quite rare for him, isn't it?
Second one he ever did.
Close Encounters, didn't he? I think.
Yeah, and he's doing Fabelmans, which is out this year, which is going to be his big Oscar push.
I mean, in reality, obviously, I'm sure he contributes greatly to the scripts without being named. And as a director, it's always his vision. But when you've got two massive visionaries, it would have been difficult for them to sort of do it together. So I think it's better that he passed the baton onto him. But yeah, I think if you've got two geniuses like that and there's a chance to see something that they've both worked on, it's a real pleasure. And I think it had to happen at this time as well. I think in the 80s, you might be right. Steven might not have been quite ready for the sort of dramatic parts. Maybe he would have been, but just to do it justice, it sort of like brings the best out of him. And whereas, as you've said, Tom, maybe Kubrick wouldn't be quite as good on the, I don't know, conveying the characters across, particularly children. I don't know how many, has he done any films with, I suppose, Danny in The Shining, but he's not really had anything like this either to work with. So I think on paper, it does seem both of them, I think, the film.
It's a really good point, actually, about the children, because, we spoke a lot over Tom, you were on our video for Empire of the Sun, where we get to speak about, young Christian Bale breaking through. And I think we've said it a lot over the sort of the last few months with Tom Pickers. Oh, you're on Hook, of course, which is almost a children's cast.
Yeah.
There's no better director that works with younger people. And ironically, I was thinking of Christopher Columbus, of course, Home Alone and Harry Potter. And what's fascinating for me was finding out, I'd always heard the rumors that Spielberg was attached or had been in discussions for Harry Potter at one point. I never fully believed it, but it's sort of looking at it from today. Obviously, I was 4 years old when that film was in pre-production, so I wouldn't have known. But on paper, Spielberg's probably the name to do a Harry Potter adaptation. Again, at the time, this humongous best-selling book, kids cast, magic, visuals, everything. Chris Columbus taking over Spielberg is really interesting because you end up still with John Williams. You get this incredible production design. You get another director that can work with children. Yep. And obviously, I know this isn't a Harry Potter video, but testament to a series that was made across over a decade, and almost all of the young actors have come out absolutely perfect. I don't want to say no issues. That's really unfair. I'm just going to say that the
I know what you mean.
Young British actors, I feel, are looked after better in a studio system than young actors in America. That's probably the best way I can say that. I won't go into that too much, but of course, Spielberg is one of the masters at working with younger actors and kind of moving into his direction of this film. Actually, it's really interesting because this film has a maturity to it where, like a Kubrick film, it's not treating its audience as sort of black and white, let me explain what AI means, let me explain what everything means. It kind of takes you into it in the sense that this is what's happened, and here's the pickup of the film, which is where I had my first big surprise where, I don't want to again get into too much current politics, but this one's probably 20 years ahead talking about global warming, just come off the back of the UK heatwave we've had last week, and all this sort of stuff. It's really interesting to see a film with that. I wouldn't say it's a theme as such, but when you get towards the end, you do notice actually that's maybe a 10 or 15 years ahead of itself as what we would expect in a blockbuster or a Spielberg film. But certainly with the whole concept of the AI, so I keep looking down because I've got the Blu-ray and it's like staring at me in the face, the eyes. I'm just going to put it to the side.
It's going to give you nightmares.
It will. It's that when that shot happened, it's Leonardo DiCaprio pointing me. I'm like, oh, it's from the Blu-ray cover. But with the whole build-up of the direction of it, I think that's one of the strongest points is that we aren't treated for mugs. And is it lucky I've seen this film for the first time at the age of 26? If I'd have seen this when I was 12, would it have made sense? Maybe not. Maybe like little bits of it, but you wouldn't understand the themes and what it is to be human, what it is to be, a mech as they call the AI in this, which is really fascinating because the one thing I didn't expect in the opening scene is when they take the mask off and it's the robot. I was like, oh yeah, like it's 2001. It's not, motion capture tech that we could do today with AI or, in real life now we have robots. You see videos of them online and you see weird stuff of them online like this film. But it's really interesting how the real life technologies differed from that. And you just forget sometimes that it is a film. But I think even for the year 2000, it's pretty ballsy in its own interpretation. And I'll say respect to Kubrick for not doing it in the 90s, saying that tech wasn't there. Akin to George Lucas with the Star Wars prequels, this is somebody that waited until Jurassic Park came out and said, Spielberg's done this. Now I know I can do what I want to do. And in this case, I think it's AI. How do we feel with the Spielberg side of it, with the direction and I guess, the thematics of the, what it is to be human, to be loved by a mother?
See, to me, I feel like it's the least Spielberg film. That's just sort of my personal opinion on it, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but yeah, it doesn't come across, at least to me. Maybe I'm not watching it properly. Yeah, I mean, but that's just my opinion.
No, it's fine.
In terms of the direction, yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned Chris Columbus. He, of course, did Home Alone, and then you could say about Macaulay Culkin and him going off the rails, couldn't you, and all that sort of stuff. But they think the world of him, don't they? The cast of Harry Potter. And another name to link them all, another one of my favorite directors, M. Night Shyamalan. He was also attached to Harry Potter, I think, and of course he's the guy who got unbelievable stuff out of children actors. So Haley Joel Osment, obviously, the why he managed to get this role, and he did some other films, but again, he obviously had a tough time after. I think it was Pay It Forward he was with. That's an underrated film, and yeah, I think it is. It's interesting to see that the direction of Spielberg in this is at times whimsical, at times pretty brutal, and it's a classic 3-act film, but it's totally not what you'd expect. Each part is totally weird and different, and there's so many genres here. There's so much going on. It's so high concept. I think the concept is absolutely outstanding, and it's particular type of area of film I'm really interested in. And again, I'll do another link here. No one will have seen it probably, but Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams. Honestly, it's amazing. Directed by Chris Columbus. So, and it's a similar theme in that he is a robot who wants to grow old and be a human, and by the end, of course, he realizes he would die if he became fully human. But that's the whole point of being a human, to be mortal. And it's some amazing themes going on. It's absolute tearjerker, but that is very much the beginning and end of this film, where we get those kind of themes of what it is to be alive. And what's interesting as well about AI is that nowadays, would you say 99% of films set in the future are dystopian? They're all totally bleak, aren't they? They're always like, oh no, a warning to everybody. The very few utopian. Demolition Man is one, which is meant to be utopian, but of course it's actually bad. It's all looking like everything's great, but of course which is an interesting way of doing it. But this, I think it is, like you say, George, there are a few warnings, obviously, about the environment, about how we treat humans, about how we treat the robots. But it's kind of in between. It's not like the world is falling away.
Yeah.
There is still some sort of, civilizations are going okay. Yes, there's certain areas like the flesh farm that, people would see as, oh, heck, that's a bit scurrilous. And they'll have different societies which move on, and they're the sort of scary places. Whereas, where the family live at the beginning, you'd think, oh, it's lovely, everything's fine here. So I think even that's quite interesting, the concept of how life could be in the future, and how robots and artificial intelligence will come into it. I think he does a great job of not bashing us on our heads with that, but lightly putting these themes in the background and not showing off with loads of technology.
Yeah, really well said, and kind of what you mentioned there with the seeing the world. The bit that was striking when I was watching for the first time is when the mother Monica leaves him. She kind of says, "I'm so sorry, like I didn't show you the world," or there's like a line like that, and I was like, "Oh, like she hasn't." And now we're going to get this fish out of water thing, which again I didn't know anything about this film, so I was really intrigued to see how it's all going to come together. Obviously, didn't expect Jude Law as a prostitute robot, which is just. It explains the photos I'd seen of him in this film, because I was kind of like, why does he look so like latex proof in this? Like, it was such a. I'd seen photos of him. I was like, Jude Law looks so weird in that. And when you got actors, I think they're recognizable. This would have been a young Jude Law as well, which is worth adding. It's really interesting to see his character in this. But if we actually want to talk about the story, so we've kind of mentioned, we've got the opening, we've got learning the AI, we've got the middle stuff in the world. And then we've got the last 30 minutes, which completely... I did not expect that. I knew this was a 2.5-hour runtime. And I was like, hold on. I was like, we're not going to get some ridiculous Lord of the Rings 40 minutes credit sequence, are we? I thought the film was done. And then obviously we had what came after. So I kind of want to ask both of you first, because I'd imagine that we'll have more of an in-depth conversation on probably the ending. But how do we feel about the story? So if I'm just going to jump in with what I've seen of research, from what I've gathered, the opening act and final act are more of the Kubrick ideologies, and the middle act is Spielberg. And over the years, everybody thought it was the other way around. They all thought Kubrick would be the one with the prostitute AI robots, the farm, and it would be Spielberg with not the thematics per se, but the concept of the lone boy looking for his mother, which is a very Spielbergian trope. How do we feel with the story? Or if you want to just jump into that final 30 minutes, you're welcome to do that too.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion, I find it a little bit of a mishmash of ideas. I mean, some of them land and some of them, for me, don't. I do genuinely think that, as much as I can probably rag on it, and I'll try not to do that, because it's a film that I want to like, but there are just things about it that just don't really gel for me. But the most heartbreaking thing is, and obviously no one wants to do it, but childhood abandonment and abandoning a child, and it's absolutely heartbreaking, that scene. And it's indicative of the journey that Spielberg wants to take David on. He's got to find a way for him to be more human, more real, so that his sort of mother can love him as unconditionally as he loves her. That's a really, really good, and it sort of twists the general sort of, because our robots, human and AI and stuff, has been done to death pretty much. What does it mean to be human? But what is it to love someone, to love something so unconditionally? And I think that's one of the better ideas I think the film explores. But yeah, I find it a little bit of a mishmash of ideas and kind of a bit of a mess. But then again, all the really good science fiction films follow that same. They are just a bit messy, but the themes and ideas are still there, which is the important thing, I think, in a sci-fi. I'm going to be honest, I didn't gel with the Flesh Farm. It just felt a bit too Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin to me.
Very good. That's brilliant.
I love Batman and Robin. That's the thing.
Yeah, and it just felt so. Obviously, I mean, that was obviously the idea, to contrast the pristine setting for the start with the sort of grimy, gritty, grotty middle section. But I don't think it really, or at least for me, it didn't really gel with what was going on. I mean, there is some really good stuff in there. So where all the broken robots or the broken mechas are trying to find parts for them, and then you see the big moon on the horizon. And I think that sequence is fantastic. But then you get stuff like David trying to fly a police jet in what you think is going to be an action sequence, and we all know how those turned out with children, i.e. the Phantom Menace. Kids flying spaceships. It's hard to sort of get my words out in a coherent and cohesive way, because there's so much to take in.
Yeah,
I was on board with it up until the last 30 minutes, and then I kind of thought, where is this going? And then I got it really did lose me for a moment, sort of about for about 15 minutes. But I am a big sucker for sappy, big sap, and that ending sequence with him and his mother is just absolutely extraordinary. And it makes the film whole for me, even with things I don't like about it. I will always go that, well, that's just sort of made it.
So pleased you like the ending there, Tom. But yeah, I mean, think about most films now that you know exactly where they're going, how they're going to be. Pretty much every plot point you can guess. And even in sci-fi films, it's just the same old stuff. To have this really unusual narrative by proper mainstream filmmaker with Hollywood actors, huge budget, and not do many set pieces, like you say, not really do it that way. It is all about the story, and everything else is just background, but beautiful background, I think. And yeah, I think the first act is absolutely incredible. I think the way you're introduced to it, it is almost like a horror film in many ways. You know, he's a terrifying child. I really that those shots of him, sort of through the glass and everything. You are meant to think that and when he ha, 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 like that, it's really scary because he doesn't understand humor, and he doesn't, and obviously the other child doesn't. The bullying, there's all those issues. And yeah, I was just thinking about that then when you were saying that, Tom, that it's quite a cliche, isn't it? To what is it to be human? But this is more, and it's almost cliched that in everything, a mother's love, you cannot beat a mother's love. But it's the opposite here. It's the mother who just cannot accept him. And even at the end, that's obviously not real. That he thinks it's real at the end. And it's so unusual to have it that the child is the one who's more in love with his mum than the other way around. It's so unusual. And it only works for me because the middle third is very odd. And if on paper, you'd be like, what on earth is going on here? This is like a different film. But it's deliberately done to get away from everything so that it can go back. And you feel abandoned as a viewer, as David does. And that therefore, when it comes back to because his mum's in it so much to start with, and then to have a main character just gone completely, which is another thing that's unusual. And yeah, I think the way it's done, the story, and the end. I mean, the ending we might talk about in more detail, but there's hardly any dialogue in the last 40 minutes. It's a bit like, which is very much similar to 2001. I think is it the first and last half an hour of that. There's no dialogue whatsoever, and it's just visuals, the music we'll have to talk about, but I just couldn't believe it, just blown away, particularly the second time I watched it you just imagine being in the cinema watching that as an adult, understanding it. Again, it's not a kid's film, but these emotions that come to you, I just can't think of many films that manipulate you and manipulate as a filmmaker is exactly what they should be doing. That means what they're doing on screen is making you feel a certain way. And Spielberg is a master at that. He's an absolute master of that. And I think on that front alone, if you come away from this film not touched or not even just thinking about it afterwards, I think that'd be probably say more about you than.
Also, just very quickly, sorry, George. That when you were discussing it, or talking about Tom, when you were talking about Bicentennial Man, all I could think was Dr. No in this, yes. from Robin Williams.
Apparently recorded before Spielberg was ever on it. Recorded with Kubrick, apparently, which is quite. I mean, we know that Robin Williams, Aladdin voice career in the early 90s, but that really surprised me finding out that he'd recorded his stuff way earlier. And was Bicentennial Man the late 90s? Was it similar?
Yeah, I think it was.
I think it might have been around the time of all that, but it's lovely to see Robin Williams pop up. I didn't have it again. I don't know who's in this. Speaking of people that pop up with Brendan Gleeson, I was like, here we go. It's about to get fun.
Is she the fairy? I can't.
Yes. Yes, it is the fairy for that, and there was a few other names that were all miscast. We'll get to it a bit. We just jump back to the story. It's really interesting what you've both said, actually, because the one thing I expected, again, going in fresh, is when he meets Jude Law, I thought, okay, now we're going to get I know it's like a current thing with not just Star Wars, but a lot of media are doing the distant father, finding the adoption sort of storyline that a lot of things do in our medium. I thought, okay, we're going to get this heartfelt Jude Law's going to kind of adopt him, take him to the mum, get rejected, and he starts his new AI life. Because that would be something that probably a lot of directors or something would do. But that's kind of what you explained really well there, that the fact that they kind of abandoned the story, likewise the character, has really like added a lot to the ending, because we jumped that last 30 minutes. When he went down and it was like, oh, he just sort of says the same words over and over, I was like, this is a pretty daunting ending. I was like, fair play. Like this isn't Spielberg, this is a Kubrick ending. And then, I mean, I think when I texted Tom, I said, oh, I've just got to where the aliens come. Obviously, they weren't aliens. They were the advanced next down the line.
Would you know that unless you'd been told? I'm not
No,
sure.
they look like aliens, don't they? Actually, I did think, I was like, oh, have we just had a cameo from the Close Encounters aliens? Because the design, it was almost like transparent versions of them. Not the only Spielberg alien films, the noughties. We got Indiana Jones coming at some point, and it was really interesting that last 30, because I understood what was happening, but I was kind of like jumping ahead 2,000 years. I was trying to just get my head around it, because I actually loved that. Because you forget about the global warming stuff, as you sort of alluded to earlier. They tell us to start, the ice caps are melting or melted, but that's not the concept of the film. We're spending time with the people that exist in this new world. And so, I don't know if anyone saw Reminiscence last year. I actually really enjoyed that sci-fi film. That had a kind of similar thing, that it's taking place in a new society where caps are melting, cities are different, have been drowned, but that just keeps harping on to those elements. Whereas this, it's almost secondary, because when you get to the big twist of going 2,000 years later, we've had the explanation at the start. And I'm going to kind of say that what was really not surprising for me, this might be an age thing. Whenever I see whenever I see the Twin Towers in media, obviously before what happened, it's always really fascinating for me, because I was so young when it happened. I remember 9/11, but I don't have a vivid memory of the importance and significance of it at the time. I was 5 years old. So to me, when I saw Twin Towers at the start, I was like, oh, like this came out in 2001, and doing a bit of reading. So obviously this came out in May 91. We'll get to the box office later, but the UK release date was about 8 days after 9/11, or a week or two after 9/11. And it got criticised that they didn't pull it in the UK. Because Tom, you mentioned earlier that you don't remember it coming out here. I look back at that and I think, how on earth did they... I understand the concept of not pulling a film because they're in it and they don't really have an effect, but can you imagine being an audience member in September 2001? Yeah. Like,
well, didn't
it
you do
just
that
happened.
For Spider-Man, I'm sure.
Yeah, they had to delete the trailer and they had to take a scene out of the film, which I understand with it being set in New York. But again, I think because I'm a little bit younger, it's really interesting when I see these mediums, and certainly this being released the same year as those events was quite harrowing as a viewer. Yeah. And obviously, it cuts to 2000s in the future, and you see the ice caps, obviously with the Twin Towers in them still. Again, real life events, no one would have ever predicted what could and did happen. Yeah. So I don't want to get into a conversation about the sort of morality of it. They don't need to be CGI'd because the film is already out. That's my logic with it. And I just thought it's a really interesting premise. But yeah, the whole concept of Final 30, I'm kind of both of you. I was kind of a bit, not perplexed, but when you get to the final moments, the final scene, with the teddy bear, with the bringing the hair out from earlier, which is actually a really well set up moment, to get in the reconstruction. I love the fact that it's for one day only. And I think that's the hook for me. If it had been this, we've recrafted her, she's now a mech, that would, to me, completely disrupt and destroy what this film is trying to be. But it's almost like he experiences the mortality of being human because he gets one day with her. And I think that crux is, to me, why the film works. I think if you get the ending wrong, it's not just the last 30 minutes that sort of gets ruined. It's really the second and third acts completely December. What I think is a really interesting setup in the opening third. And I want to say as well, it's quite ballsy again that, Spielberg's paying homage to Kubrick. With this, the reports that Spielberg almost changed nothing. They'd had storyboards, they'd had concept art with each other. There's so much stuff, and a lot of people have said, how well it was done. Which I trust Spielberg to respect another director. He's one of the directors. I think, like many of us, they wouldn't dare try to disrupt what somebody had done before, especially with how close it was to his passing. That'd have been ridiculous had anyone tried it. And again, I'm quite grateful that Spielberg did this film, and as we both said, I don't think anyone else could have done it. But does anyone else want to speak about the ending, or do we want to jump to the characters, which we've spoken obviously about David a little bit? But if we really get into them, hated Joel Osment. So I've not seen Sixth Sense. I'm just going to say this now.
No spoilers.
I know. Well, this is it's like that and Star Wars, the two films that everyone knows the twist to. And I thought, I was like, this isn't the kid from Gladiator, is it? And I was like, no, that was the one from Unbreakable, the other M. Night Shyamalan film.
Yeah.
And I was obviously watched The Boys recently as well, where Haley Joel Osment appears. So there's like a washed-up young actor in that, which is quite funny. He's not that in real life, but it's really interesting seeing him in this because you both said that he's quite scary, he's quite creepy. And I think playing an AI, again, there's two ways. You make it so robotic, it's, you know, like literally doing the robot maneuvers, but he's able to bring this sort of innocent but creepy vibe to it. And I think it's not just his performance, it's the way the film's shot, it's the cinematography, it's the lighting in this is really not claustrophobic, but it's sort of overbearing. And obviously, we would after the front cover, but it's intentional. And I think you get really good effect from that. And it's really interesting with this character because at the start, I didn't really like him. I was like, am I going to have to follow this kid for the entire film? A dislikable character. And actually, you know, when you see him alone trapped, you get the build up. We know he's going to get dumped that day. And shout out to Teddy as well, who I absolutely loved in it. I didn't expect to get almost teddy bears being the equivalent of dogs in the new world. But I loved that dynamic, and I think the teddy bears are my favourite characters. Maybe because I kept thinking of Winnie the Pooh from the recent film. I don't know. But how do we feel about some of those characters we mentioned there?
He's very good in this. And I think it's probably one of if you're going on the two big films that Haley Joel Osment has been in, this and Sixth Sense, I think this is the better performance from him. Not to say that Sixth Sense he's not good in, which he absolutely is. But I think there's much more for him to do in terms of bringing a little bit of range to it. And yeah, like you said, he gets it down to an absolute T. The sort of initial creepiness of having this thing sort of in your home, and it's obviously daunting and scary. But then over time, you start to notice more about the intricacies of his personality, essentially, because all these robots do seem to have personalities built in, and they all do seem very different to one another. But I will say that I found his brother very irritating. Yeah. Oh, he's just such like right. Okay, I don't want to
say it's fun.
Rag on children, but the guy is an arsehole. Like,
yeah,
and I kept watching it and go, children don't talk like this. Come on. But I think everything else around that, besides Henry as a character, I think is really good. I think everybody brings their A game. The one thing that I absolutely, which is one of the reasons why I dislike the Flesh Fair, was the comedian robot played by Chris Rock.
I had to do a double take. I was like, can I hear Chris Rock? Yeah. And I was like, oh my god, they've just literally made a robot, a spitting image of Chris Rock for like a scene. And it was so random. And like, I'm going to say, because I love Chris Rock as a comedian, but even for me, that felt like, is it just me? That felt like the outside world was far. I don't want to say contextual because Chris Rock, is like a legend of comedy, but that was very early noughties. Who's the up and coming comedian, which I think disrupts this film. I don't even think it's meant to be a visual gag either. It was just really random.
Yeah, it was, and it doesn't really work for the sort of tone they're trying to set in the scene, and that really took me out of it. But really took me out of it. But I mean, he's just going back to the other characters, and they're all the other actors rather. They're all very good in it, and I actually really enjoyed the cameo by Enrico Colantoni, who's really good. But yeah, I think they all do wonderful jobs, except maybe Chris Rock. But then again, he's just playing Chris Rock at that point.
I'd forgotten about Chris Rock in it, but you're absolutely right. If you're trying to build a whole new world, you don't want someone to take you out of it and think, oh right, that's because they do a good job of making you think it is really what New York or wherever,
Yeah.
and then just to have that as a sort of not as a serious. If it was something more serious, perhaps something prescient or foreboding and heck, this could happen to us kind of thing. Like if they had a Trump-like figure or something. But
it'd be like it was James Corden today, wouldn't it? If this was made today, it'd be a James Corden cameo.
Yeah,
but the crowds would be cheering at the thought of his robot getting disintegrated.
Oh, that would have taken you out of it, but would have been good. Yeah. But yeah, very good. That is harrowing though. That bit, isn't it? When the robot is crushed and everything, But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's completely intentional, and Haley Joel Osment does such a good job that you really don't warm to him, because the intention is that you will do by the end of the film, even if it's just pity. Really, he's not a lovable. He's not got a lovable personality, has he? Because that's part of the point. And like you say, the performance isn't he's a robot, so let's do the odd jerky movements. The reason he's a robot is because his social interaction is poor, and he just doesn't understand how to. By the book, he's doing everything right, and he just wants to be loved, and that's how he's been programmed. But real life doesn't work like that, and his brother obviously doesn't want to play with him; he just wants rid of him. And there's that in the between pool, tries to drown him, and it's just kids watching this. It's so dark. I love it.
It's the other bullies that are like putting him on as well, and I was like,
it's awful.
Because on the one hand, obviously they should sort of know better. You think they'd know better, but I think it's more stems from the curiosity that these kids are feeling from him. So they're trying to make him, obviously, because they know about the pain receptors and him wincing at pain that he's obviously not feeling, and that's one of the reasons why he drags poor Henry in the pool. But yeah, I think it was fascinating to see the interaction between the human characters and the robots, because as you mentioned, Tom, you can tell they're robots based on their social interactions. They're not quite there, and it's obviously and that is why it's obviously down to the mother to teach him those social interactions, and obviously she doesn't do that.
It is interesting that there's much more focus on the mother than the father. He's not because Spielberg is usually more about the father. So, it is. You might not be able to do it these days, would you? It'd be too controversial to say, the mother's love is more important, even though that is coming from a robot and it's how he's been programmed. But I mean, is it Dennis Leary, the father? I can't remember now. He was very good. Because he's sort of less serious, and he's not really. I might be wrong, actually, who it is. But
no, I've got it here. It is Sam Robards, who I'm not actually
Jason
familiar
Robards
with.
Yeah. There's a lot of people like William Hurt's in it, isn't he? And so he's recently died, and is that like one of the opening scenes, isn't it? And then he's in it again, obviously later. But
he has a presence as well. He has this presence for a couple of scenes, and you even get like a really young like Clark Gregg. Obviously, everyone will know these days from Avengers, and it's very interesting. And again, it's one of those Spielberg films where he does that so much of his career that you get these actors that end up being bigger names down the line, or they just want to be in a Spielberg film, and they'll make it work. And I mean, do we want to speak about Jude Law with Gigolo Joe, which? It's one of the weird. I mean, Jude Law's done a lot of weird roles, and I really like Jude Law as an actor. I think I don't want to say he's underrated, but I think he's somebody that you kind of have to acquire the taste for him. Is that a weird sentiment to say? That I think he's a very unique actor, and I don't think a lot of actors could do his roles, even though people think that he's like a Hugh Grant type. In this, I just don't have a clue what I'm watching, and it's so. I mean, I know what I'm watching. It's so random, but I love the whole Gene Kelly vibe with it, because obviously we literally have him dancing in the rain at the end, and I'm just gonna say I'm never fully invested in their storyline when he saves him to go underwater to go up. I didn't feel anything. I didn't care. it was like, oh, bye, Jude Law. Like, it was nice seeing you for a bit. But not that I want to spend more time with the prostitute Alistair, but I loved the very short look into the world of, like, you know, his partner being murdered or if she cheated on someone with him. Like, all that weird stuff. I'm not saying it's right in my street, but I was like, let's spend a bit of time here, maybe, or don't spend any at all, because very Joel Schumacher-esque. That stuff I'm gonna add too, and it's I would be so curious to see again. Like, it's fine with us three, but if you had a younger person like watching that middle segment, like jump from family drama to Jude Law, and it's so.
You'd be in the cinema with your kids. Well, Mum, what's a gigolo?
Yeah.
It's so random, and it's just like, I think the costume designs with him, it all just adds to it. But I mean, what comes to obviously Jude Law is the whole sequence of, you know, even him saving him, I feel a bit weird with I love Brendan Gleeson when he pops up. He's welcome in any film he's ever in. Flying in the moon on his, it's like watching Harry Potter again. He's coming on his broomstick. But the festival thing, it was a weird, because I both didn't like the scene. I did like the scene. I actually, in such a short space of time, you felt not emotional for the robots, but you understand them, that they have consciences. You've got the poor one pleading like, I've been on the cover of Time 75 years ago or something. All that stuff, I'm quite easy to be sold with things like that. But I'd imagine in the year 2000, like, selling the concept of AI robots is probably tougher than it is in 2022. I think it was a newer premise then, but it was a pretty horrific scene when people are like getting like acid baths. You've got the old, I forgot the name of the Chinese. It was way back when we studied at school, but you know, is it the five horse pull thing with you get that to the droid as well when they like rip all its limbs off? That's a pretty horrendous scene for like droid fanatics. How do we feel with it? Did that stick out like a sore thumb, or did that like enhance the message of the film for you all?
Ooh, good question. I think it did. I mean, for me, and that's I mean, I don't really have an awful lot else to say on that front.
I think with Jude Law, he's one of these actors where he was more famous for being famous. When he was this age, he was like a film star, but he was never in any massive films that were huge, you know, massive successes. And that was the case with Ryan Reynolds, really, until Deadpool. He was like very famous for being a famous actor, but he was like, well, which are your favourite Ryan Reynolds films? And no one could probably name any then. And Jude Law took an unusual route because he wasn't in that many. He was in big directors' films, you know, like this, and of course, later he's done like he did Gattaca and things like that, where he's absolutely fantastic. Okay, talented Mr. Ripley, obviously, and very, very well critically well received films, but not really any that. But he was more famous because he slept with his nanny. I'll be honest, you know, at the time that's true. That's and he was like an English heartthrob kind of thing, and he is an underrated actor. You know, unashamedly one of my favourite films, The Holiday, he's in. He's very charismatic, and he's a bit like that in this, where he's very affable and the audience is really with him. But it's an unusual role to play, isn't it? I mean, like you say, George, not many people could do this. Pull it off.
Yeah,
weird vibe, the comedy and everything. Yeah, it's very odd.
I do feel as though if you're not on board with it in the first 5 minutes of him appearing, you're not going to gel with him at all.
Yeah, and I'll say with Jude Law, when he's done like big films, obviously, you know, I will say he's probably the best thing of not that it really matters anymore. The Fantastic Beasts will be a trilogy, not a series, a saga. He's the best thing in it, and he's playing young Dumbledore, and I think he's great in that. And I remember he was in one of the Marvel stuff, and of course Sherlock Holmes is one of the first things I saw him in, which I think he was great in as well. You're right. He's almost as famous as being like Jude Law than as you said, his roles, which is really interesting. I think you had a couple of them actors, and Hugh Grant, I'd say, is one of them. You know, very much the heartthrob, and as you know, not to encourage scandals, but we know what the British media is like. Anytime they can grab a scandal off someone of that status, they'll go for it, and it kind of adds to it. I mean, Oh, sorry, Tom.
I was just going to say, looking through the films he did around the time. I mean, you like I always forget, like, because you obviously see Jude Law and you just think, oh, it's Jude Law in a film. But at the time, I think you probably didn't really. He was sort of getting engrossed in characters, because you had him in, as you mentioned, Gattaca, Enemy at the Gates, Talented Mr. Ripley, Road to Perdition, Cold Mountain. Like, these are all big, directors' films. So yeah, I think he was. It seems like at the time he was sort of a go-to for sort of big films of this ilk.
But they weren't.
Now I've got him in Star Wars now.
Yeah. Oh, really?
I'm actually half. Jude Law in Star Wars, I think, Scott. Sorry,
definitely.
I always remember Star Wars, but he's a very. I really like him as an actor. I think he's one of them when you're younger. It's like Jude Law, but actually, as you said there, Tom, he's some great roles with his, and I think he's very, and he's lovely. When I met him, he was really nice. I'm going to add that. But not that really matters about the films, but it does help when they're not a dick in real life and you get the chance to meet them. If we want to talk as well about the legend we always do on this series, let's talk some John Williams. As I said, I come on every week and say he's great. His score in this, I mean, when this is more of a science fiction thing, when you have the career John Williams has, that's even up to 2001, let alone, like the other decades before, his input on science fiction is already, like, to me personally, unparalleled with Star Wars. And what I love is when you have a composer that's been in that genre before and is able to do something completely different, to have different themes, to have different approaches. And certainly the last 30 minutes is very Kubrick in the sense that it is about the visuals and the audio experience from it. And I'm pretty sure it's like a piano. Like, I don't remember any other instrument for the end of the film. And it's just John Williams being John Williams. It reminds me of E.T. actually, now I think about it, how he did the E.T. score. He had an Oscar nomination for this film, as he usually would get with Spielberg. But I think this is one, because again, I knew nothing about this film. It's probably one of, not his better scores, because he's the greatest ever. Like, his better scores are better than pretty much any composer could ever do. But this is one people don't speak about, which is a shame, because I think there's some really good stuff in there. It's probably just not as memorable to the masses, or the film isn't as well known as some of those other ones he's done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest. I didn't really listen all that much to the music that was in there, and I think back when I saw it originally, I kind of forgot that it was even John Williams' score. That's sort of what I thought at the time. I mean, there is some really good stuff in there, and obviously he adds so much to scenes when he's on his A game, and I think that he complements the film really, really nicely, and especially in the heartbreaking moments and the really powerful, hopeful ones. So at the very end, whilst it's a bleak ending, given all the humans are dead, and David is the last remnant of sort of their, as one of the advanced mechas puts it, their genius. But the moment that he meets his mother for the day is fantastically well scored, and it just adds so much to what you're listening to, and it brings a tear to your eye.
Wow. Yeah. Again, when I first saw it, I probably didn't notice it enough. And we actually had a friend who, bit of an odd guy, he was a pianist, and he just said, he hardly spoke, and he said, "Oh, can I just play something on you?" Because my mum's had a grand piano. And he said, "Oh, could I just play this? It's Artificial Intelligence from John Williams." And I was thinking, I hadn't seen it. I thought, sort of a bit odd sci-fi film, right? Well, this is going to be some really bombastic. And then it's this unbelievable, beautiful piano melody. And since then, I was like, whoa, hang on, I better concentrate more. And I genuinely think it is one of his very best scores now. I think that if you look back at a lot of the films that aren't as well known of Spielberg's, some of those scores are terrific. So Amistad, I think the score is unbelievable. But because it's not, the film isn't as well known, or it's not readily seen, it gets forgotten. Even the films where you think the score isn't that important. So Minority Report, obviously a huge film, nearly everyone loves it. but there's some really good bits in it. There's some really melodic bits that people forget. And Catch Me If You Can, you know, there's some really quality. And he did get, I think he got nominated for an Oscar for this, for the score.
Yeah.
I know he does for pretty much everything, to be fair, but this, yeah, for me, I think if without the score, I think it does a lot of the heavy lifting at the end, and it's just beautiful. The piano chords, and I don't know whether you know there's a duet version of it, you know, like a pop version with Josh Groban, who's got people say it's cheesy, but he's got one of the best voices you've ever heard. It's incredible, and that is like, yeah, check that out definitely. But it's just achingly beautiful, and I think you're quite right. I hadn't thought about that. It is, the music's far more positive at the end and far more. It's melancholic as well, isn't it? There's a sadness to it, and yeah, it's complete gut punch. I think if you're in the right mood like me, you know, if you just watch it on your own, feeling a bit emotional, you're gonna cry at this music and at that ending, I think.
Yeah, I mean, whilst it is melancholy, you know, there is some melancholy, there's some sadness there as well. Like this moment in day, and this is why I think the score complements it really well. Is that this moment, even though it's quite this is the last time that he's going to see his mum. It's a powerful moment and will stay with him for the rest of his life. So while he might be alone in the future, that memory is still gonna be there. And I think that is conveyed extremely well through John Williams' score in this. Yeah, no, I've actually got it on playing right now, and it's
for anyone watching at home. So Tom was last showing us this review, and after that video finished, which was I'm just going to recommend it, not because we've done it. That was one of the toughest videos we've done on the channel. And one of the videos I'm probably one of the most proud of in a very weird way, because it was so tough to do and you handled it very well. Came to afterwards, you'd listen to the score for the entirety of that review, which I find incredible. I don't know how you have the concentration to come out as well as you do on these videos whilst listening. It's not me telling you off. It's like it's a backhand compliment. I think.
Don't do it.
But no, do it, because I was like, how was he talking so eloquently whilst listening to the music? I'd be just making noises from the soundtrack. But no, I love that discussion on the soundtrack, and again, it's really interesting hearing this, and especially with the duet. If we move on to talk about some of the legacy of the film, we mentioned Williams' Oscar nomination. They are also nominated for Best Visual Effects back in 2001. Its rivals, Pearl Harbor and The Fellowship of the Ring. Of course, Fellowship would go on to win that, which is completely understandable. With obviously what that film would go on to do and what that film would spawn, and its box office, which surprised more. I don't know why I thought this would be a flop. But it grossed 235 mil off a 100 mil budget, which I think, for me, I view it as old school sci-fi. I think that's a tough cookie for audiences to view. However, I would imagine in the year 2001, there's probably a lot of the Spielberg and Kubrick, discussions together, which I think would have been its own sell. And actually, I think mature audiences would probably enjoy a film like this. So it was pretty cool seeing that box office. And what I kind of want to move on to with that is, we've spoke a lot about the film. Not so many people speak about it today. Before we get into our final thoughts, we spoke about a lot of the scenes. Some of them were impactful ones, some of them we weren't familiar with. Has anybody got like a favorite scene we potentially haven't spoken about, or do we think we've covered it? Because if I was just going to pick a favorite scene, I'm probably going for the ending one, which I think a lot of people might also go for.
Yeah, I mean the final 15 minutes of this is just absolutely brilliant. And if you don't get like this is a bit, a bit conjecture, but if you don't get bleary-eyed or teary over that final 15 minutes, there's definitely something wrong with you, and you should be more in touch with your emotions, because whilst that's one of my favorite sequences in the film. And obviously the moment where he goes under the water, and that heartbreaking moment where he's in the pod and he's calling out to the blue fairy is really quite, you talk about heartbreaking. That's, this is, you think, and as you rightly said, you think the film's going to end here, and it's like, wow, that's a bit depressing. The moment where his mother leaves him is really well acted, well done, and it's fabulous. I mean, there are really fabulous scenes in it that I absolutely love, and then there are moments in it that I really just think, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I didn't necessarily enjoy the sequence with Doctor No and Robin Williams in it.
Also, sorry, I just wanted to mention Doctor No. I thought it was going to be a Bond reference at the start. I was like, thank God I've got Tom Pickup on this. And I was just sort of there, like, I was like, Doctor No. I was like, is this a joke? Like, is this going to be like someone, you know, without arms or something? And I was like, oh, it's Robin Williams. Oh, it's Nova's in the intelligence that he knows. And yeah, anyone else get Doctor like Bond vibes when you saw
it? I did. Yeah. I was like, what? It's like some bald man in a chair gonna come and.
Yeah, it's hard to go beyond sort of those two major sequences, and that's not to say everything that's come before hasn't been leading up to it and really effective. So even the stuff in the woods with Teddy and all that's pretty impressive. The visuals are incredible, and yeah, that scene, like you say, I did think it was aliens the first time I saw it. My mind was so blown by what an amazing original concept that is, to think that, of course, technically in however many thousands of years, something like that might happen, and that they might have been there at the exact moment and that they could have found him. I know since then they've clarified it is just more technology, isn't it? You know, more AI. But even that, it's still moving. You know, that it was so unlikely that he got found. And the way it's shot and the way he is found facing the blue fairy is so amazing. And the visual effects are fantastic. They're not overly CGI, even though it would have been very, very easy to do it in this film at this age. But yeah, the last, and there's narration, and you can get slated for this. It is manipulative. It's got harrowing music. It's got the lighting is really harrowing, and the fact that it is Spielberg schmaltz, and I know he'll say that the ending is all Stanley. I know he said that. He's probably wanting to sort of just try and say to everyone, look, I'm not a one-trick pony here. You know, I can do more than just that, but I'm damn good at doing that kind of stuff at the end, because that is just it's first-rate filmmaking. It's very difficult to do that. It's easy to dismiss scenes like that are very schmaltzy and they make you cry and all that, but there's loads of filmmakers who would try that and not be able to pull it off like Spielberg does. So I think he deserves amazing credit for that ending.
No, really well said, and that's going to kind of jump into the final thoughts for me as well. I think for a film I knew nothing about, a film that I didn't gear up to dislike, but a film I thought no one speaks about this, I'm probably not going to have that hype or that intensity watching. I was really surprised at how much I was taken aback by it, and actually how good I thought the film was. I thought this would be, as many would describe, it's Spielberg doing a favor for Kubrick after he passed. It might not be him at his best. It might be a clash of ideas. I never felt that. It's a pretty eye-opening experience, and to me, science fiction is my favorite genre. I love my action stuff. I love the simple stuff. I love most genres. But when you get a deep-rooted science fiction film that is exploring, it's always sci-fi that explores humanity, I feel, better than dramas can ever do, which I think is a fascinating concept within itself.
Well, yeah, because you can. What's good about science fiction? You can incorporate real-world elements into it without actually expressly stating that is the case, which is so you can explore loads of different things, which is why I really like sci-fi as well.
Yeah, and I think it's wherever. I think for a sci-fi film, not enough people speak about it, which is a shame. And it'd be, it's great if anyone watches this that might check it on or might give it a go. And I think this is a sleeper. I think this is a film that's very good. And again, when you're looking at someone of the crew of Spielberg, Kubrick as well, you can understand why this might not be brought up in conversations, but there's a lot to take in. I'm very fresh on viewing it today. And I think I'll be thinking about this film for a couple of days if I'm being really blunt, a sign of what's to come. So that's my polite final thoughts. What about both of you?
I mean, this discussion has been really good for me cementing my thoughts on it after so many years, and having viewed it for the second or third time yesterday. That it is a film that I actually do think is genuinely really good, but there are things in it that I really don't get on with. But I wouldn't, if nothing's perfect, and for that final act, I will have it this way, because that just cements everything that is so powerful about the film. I think it's certainly one that I will need to keep watching to really fully develop a undying love for. But at the moment, I think it is generally really, really good.
So happy, Tom. Because I can genuinely understand, and I would respect those who just do not get it and they don't like it, and that's a valid viewpoint, because it's such a weird film. It's for a mainstream filmmaker, like I say, with Hollywood actors and a huge budget, it's totally different to what you'd expect. I think I said to George before, I want to quote Mark Kermode on this, because I've had not quite a similar experience to him on it, because he said, I think when it came out, he dismissed it and thought it was too schmaltzy, and he just forgot about it completely. And then I don't know whether it was speaking to Steven Spielberg about it, who, ironically, with Hook, he doesn't really rate Hook, and I just can't believe. It's so weird, isn't it? You've done all that effort and you've made the film yourself, and you don't like it, and we love it. But with this AI, I'd love to know what Spielberg thinks about it today, because Mark Commode's gone back to it, and he regards it. He says he did a video of it about how he's changed his views, and you can see it on YouTube. It's very good. But he does say at the end, I honestly think it's his enduring masterpiece now. That's what he says, and it's like almost the thing that he could possibly be most proud of as a filmmaker. And I know that sounds absolutely ridiculous to say AI is Spielberg's masterpiece, because he's just made some of the greatest films that I've ever made, and there's no point trying to compare them, because they're all so good, and we're so glad we've got them. But I do think it is his most challenging film. It's his most emotional film. It's okay. I don't mean things like, Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan, Amistad. They're more challenging as in the themes they're dealing with. But in terms of just really trying something different and thinking about how to make a film different, because, I'll have to watch the Schindler's List one, because for me, that's another one that it's too easy to just say, oh, it's a great film, isn't it? Just because it won a load of Oscars. No, go back and watch it again. It is a masterpiece. I remember when it came out, and I thought, some people might be sniffy and say it's Oscar bait, anything to do with, the Holocaust and all that. It would be much easier to win, but no. It's a masterpiece. The way it's shot, the way it makes you feel. And yes, Tom, I think when you go back to this film, I'm not really into the whole, you don't understand it, you need to see it millions of times to get it and all that. And it must have been weird for you, George, seeing it now for the first time. Going in blind, how much better? How much better to do it like that? And I think when you see it again, now that you know these themes are coming, I think it will perhaps mould a bit better. It will make a bit more sense. Yeah. Yes, there are bits which are a bit jarring, possibly deliberately so, but the beginning and the end are unbeatable for me, and I think it's definitely one of my favourite, and the one that I had to go into bat for tonight, because I just love this film so much.
No, it's amazing. And when we got you on previously, before, for anyone curious and behind the scenes, before we even began this series, you reached out to me straight away off the announcement. Like, it wasn't the obvious ones, like Indie, Jurassic Park, etc.
I do love those as well. I'm not...
Yeah, well, this is it. But it was Hook, AI, and Warhorse, which I don't mind saying, and I was like, not interesting. And we're going to plug shortly into where we can find everyone. I was like, the Bond podcasts are coming on for the opposite, but which is kind of amazing, because for me, the beauty of this series is not just bringing on different people every week. It's people, the films they're connected to more than the others, the ones that aren't just the big names, the ones that have that impact or that gravitas. And this discussion has been pretty amazing for me. Because I've gone in blind, so I've seen it for the first time, but I don't normally get to talk about films with people after I see them, like literally after I see them, which has kind of made this video even better, actually. And you mentioned Saving Private Ryan. We haven't even mentioned this was his follow-up to that. How do you follow up Saving Private Ryan?
Yeah.
And that might also be why this isn't spoken about as much, because it's the one that came after. And I'd argue that with the Minority Report having Tom Cruise, and of course that's the big draw to that one. It's almost like a forgotten sandwich in the same way Amistad is between Ryan and Jurassic Park. So yeah, it's been amazing getting these discussions going. And for anybody watching at home, we really want to hear from you. Again, I do think science fiction just provokes the mind more so than other genres. And I want to hear your thoughts on this film. Please do comment your thoughts on AI, artificial intelligence. It's been a really amazing discussion tonight. And as I said, please comment those thoughts. And if you're a fan of Steven Spielberg, if you're a fan of sci-fi, hit the subscribe button. This series isn't going away anytime soon. This is the 20th episode. There's 34 total, not including the Fabelmans, who have been shafted in the United Kingdom again of that release date. But what we can say next up is, of course, Minority Report. That is going to be going up Tuesday, the 16th of August. We get to talk Tom Cruise. We get to talk Spielberg, science fiction, John Williams, all that great stuff. That's going to be a very interesting discussion, and I'm excited for that. Mr. Woods, I know we've got you on that. Other guests will be confirmed a little bit later down the line, some behind-the-scenes stuff. And if I'm going to look ahead to the future of the series, I mentioned Minority Report. What else is coming up? Well, we've got Catch Me If You Can, The Terminal, and finally on the boards, War of the Worlds. I'm so excited for that one. As a lovely plug, go back to our Duel review. Episode 1, me and Tom Woods, we both got to talk War of the Worlds that far back. So there's some really fun ones on it. If anyone's curious about behind the scenes, I don't mind saying this on there, and it's not that no one has messaged us. The second most requested audience video of this series has been The Terminal after Jurassic Park. The amount of people, as you said, Tom, you reached out to me about AI, and I was like, excellent. The amount of people saying The Terminal, I was like, I don't even know what The Terminal is. I didn't know anything about it. I just knew it was Tom Hanks looking lonely on a poster. So that's going to be an interesting one.
I should have said that one as well. But I'm so glad that other people have. That's one of my very favourites.
So what's it been? Jurassic Park and then The Terminal?
The Jurassic Park, then The Terminal, and then kind of like Indiana Jonesy films. The big films. And listen, with his illustrious career, it's completely understandable, but I think that makes it more exciting. Like, I don't mind taking the time in a video. It makes it more exciting doing this series, like not choosing who comes on, because a lot of the time it's who were we able to get on, who is free for filming dates, because people curious behind the scenes of these aren't easy to organize. Doing one a week. Sometimes we'll batch record 3 or 4 in a week. Sometimes we'll do it as close to the wire as possible, and we want to kind of bring on familiar faces, newer faces, and obviously people with different backgrounds specific for videos, and it's really exciting. So I'm just sat here like, why The Terminal? And we're only a few weeks away from
when you see it, George.
We could have a stacked panel like Endgame and have like 8 people on. I'm joking. I'm not going to do that. That was a long review. But no, it's going to be exciting. And as I said, we'll have both of you on across this series in more episodes. But before we round up, we go over our socials. We're going to go over. So, Tom Woods, you've now appeared on the most videos on this series. Sorry, Tate. I know this is like a little internal competition Tom's got going on.
Well, Tate doesn't know about this, but it's an internal competition that I've had with him very secretly.
And also, shout out to Gattaca, Tate's favourite film, so he'll love the fact that was a name drop today.
Yeah.
Socials. Yeah, sorry. You can find me on Twitter at Films and Beer, and I did run a blog and am looking to pick that up again. www.filmsandbeer.co.uk.
Yeah. Triple H screaming evolution. Hint, hint, wink, wink of what could come. I won't push you on the spot. But Tom Pickup, for anyone that doesn't already follow you or follow Radio 007 podcast, always jump in. Just explain to them, if they haven't already worked out what the podcast is about or what they can expect. I didn't know about the interview with Kubrick's daughter, so I will be checking that out tomorrow. I'm actually really excited for that. But for the people at home who don't follow you, why should they, and what are you guys up to?
Well, you don't have to. I'm not gonna. It's a democracy. No. Yeah, I mean, it's very odd. It's still, how long is it? It's less than 2 years we've been doing it, but it was just meant to be a bit of a laugh. But it has exploded, and it's been amazing. And we're doing a series at the moment. It's a James Bond podcast, obviously. So that's a quote from Q in a couple of the films. But the sort of the thing we do a bit different, I suppose, is we just like to have a chat that is so informal about everything. We're also like you, George. We try and get loads of different guests on, and at the moment we're doing a series of each Bond is being shown once a week consecutively in cinemas. So every week, anyone who's seen it at the cinema, just send me your thoughts on it, and it'll all be included in an episode. So I think we started off the Doctor No one. I just thought about that as an idea on the spot, and it was about 40 minutes. Now, I think A View to a Kill last week, I had about 2 hours, 15 minutes. I think The Living Daylights is going to be even longer. So, License to Kill, GoldenEye, it's going to be, I don't know what I'm going to, have to be part 1, part 2. But yeah, it's been good because we've interviewed quite a lot of the cast and crew of these films as well. So, luckily, we've sort of already done them in advance like you do, George. So, I'm trying to link one with each film. So it's quite difficult. It's pretty busy for me at the moment trying to release everything, but they're always there. You know, the timeless. I think these films. So everything we do is always going to be there. A bit like you with your reviews. You know, it's a timeless review in that sense because you're just talking about the specific films. But yeah, we're on social media. Just follow us, Really 007 Pod. And if you're a massive Bond fan and would like to get involved, then send us an email, send us a message. That'd be great.
Everybody, please do link in the description for more than the socials. I've a link to the streaming sites, everything in between. By the time the video comes up, we'll be in the Pierce Brosnan era of James Bond at the cinemas, and I have all 4 showings booked in. I've not done any so far. Not that I don't like the others, I love them, but they aren't Pierce Brosnan, and he reigns supreme. So yeah, maybe you might hear my voice over there. We'll find out. So yeah. Everybody, as I said, please do follow them. We'll have you on some. I said we mentioned Warhorse already. Tom, we've mentioned you for Minority Report. Next week we'll get. In theory, that's just going to keep boosting the Battle with You intake, which is going to be fun when he gets back from America. But aside from that, if you want to follow us on our socials, if you don't already, we announce a lot of our videos on there. Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. And we've got a link to Redbubble where you can pick up some merch and help support the channel and all that sort of good stuff. It does help. And the hat's really good. I keep wearing the hat a lot. Not that I'm trying to rep the channel around my town, but it's a comfy hat and it's better than the normal. Well, I always just wear the same Avengers or Mercedes on, so it's nice to have something different for a change. But what else is coming up? As I said, there's been a lot of reviews on the channel recently. There'll be a review for Prey. There'll be a review for Arsenal, All or Nothing, ended up being nothing, and some other things. So yeah, check us out. TV reviews, film reviews. There's a lot of stuff on the way. We're in August now. We've got not just the new football season, of course, starting. We've got Cassie at the end of the month. We've got Lord of the Rings in September. We're heading to one of the busiest end of years ever. And there's a football World Cup on. So
are you're gonna be reviewing that, George? The
World Cup.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't mind saying there was a concept because Tate's really into sport as well. We've got a lot of people that I know both of you are massive on football, and we've got a lot of people involved. And I did have this internal debate. Like, I'd love to do some sports stuff for the World Cup. Now we have people on that like football. And then you just realise that how many thousands of people were killed by the Qatar people to do the World Cup. So
yeah,
not to end it on a downer, it's like, had it been any other World Cup year, I think we could have done some really cool football stuff on the channel. But any documentaries, we'll have them covered. So just not Qatar. I'm probably going to get banned from going over. Not that I want to. I won't last long. But yeah, rounding out with sort out the human rights issues in a lot of countries around the world. Take care, everybody. Thank you for watching. And as I said, join us on Minority Report, which is all about ethics, which is even better of a plug. So join us next week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you then.